Lonely CEO entered his own restaurant as a homeless man. Only the young waitress saved him a seat. The security guard did not recognize him. Neither did the manager, who glanced up once, wrinkled his nose and looked away. Nobody in that glittering restaurant recognized the man in the torn coat and mud-caked boots as Richard Hale, the billionaire who had built the very building they stood in. And that was exactly what Richard wanted to find out. Snow fell in thin, stinging sheets over the city that night, the kind of cold that crawled under coats and settled into bones. Richard Hale stood across the street from Hale and Company, the flagship restaurant bearing his own name, watching through the frost-fogged glass as waiters in crisp black vests glided between tables draped in white linen. He had built this place from nothing 18 years ago, poured his marriage, his friendships, and the best years of his life into it, and tonight, dressed in a stranger's ragged coat with 3 days of stubble on his jaw, he was about to find out what his empire had actually become. He took a breath that clouded in the icy air, pulled the collar up around his neck, and pushed open the door. If you believe kindness can still change the world, hit like, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so you never miss a story like this one. The warmth inside hit him first, then the smell of butter and rosemary and fresh bread, and then the silence, the sudden, cutting silence of 40 conversations stopping at once. Heads turned. Forks paused midair. A woman in a red dress pulled her purse closer to her body as if he might snatch it. Richard kept his eyes down, the way he imagined a man who had truly lost everything might, and shuffled toward the hostess stand, snow still melting in his hair. The hostess, a young man with gelled hair and a name tag that read Preston, stepped in front of him before he reached the podium. "Sir, this is a private establishment," Preston said, his voice pitched low but sharp enough to carry. "There's a shelter 2 blocks east on 5th. Richard said nothing. He had written the training manual for this restaurant himself, years ago, a manual with a single rule printed in bold letters on its very first page. Every guest who walks through our doors is treated with dignity, without exception. He wondered, standing there in another man's shoes, when that page had been quietly forgotten. He was not given the chance to answer because that was when she appeared. Her name tag said Marin. She could not have been older than 23, with dark hair pulled back into a hasty bun and flour still dusted faintly on one sleeve, as though she'd come straight from helping in the kitchen. She was carrying a tray of water glasses when she saw the exchange at the hostess stand, and something in her face changed. Not pity, not the performative concern people wear for an audience, but a quiet, immediate recognition of a man in trouble. She set the tray down on the nearest empty table without a word of explanation to anyone, walked directly past Preston, and looked Richard in the eye the way no one else in the room had bothered to. "We have a table by the window," she said simply. "Right this way, sir." Preston opened his mouth to object, glanced toward the manager's office, thought better of it, and stepped aside. Richard followed her through the restaurant, past tables of people who leaned toward each other to whisper, past a man who laughed under his breath, past a child who stared with open, unashamed curiosity until her mother turned her chin away. Marin did not rush him. She did not steer him toward a corner or a back booth where he might be hidden from paying customers. She walked him straight to a table beside the frosted window, the same table, though he did not tell her this, where he had proposed to his late wife 19 years earlier. She pulled out the chair for him herself. "Can I start you with something warm to drink?" she asked, and there was nothing rehearsed in it, nothing that sounded like customer service. It sounded like she meant it. Richard, who had negotiated with senators and closed deals worth more than some countries' budgets, found that his throat had gone tight, and he had to clear it before he could answer that coffee would be fine. While she was gone, he watched the restaurant continue around him, a machine he had designed now running without him, its gears grinding in ways he had never intended. He watched Preston mutter something to another server and nod toward Richard's table. He watched 2 men in suits at a nearby booth stare at him with open disgust between bites of the seared scallops that cost $41 a plate, a price Richard himself had approved years ago, back when he still believed that success and decency could grow in the same soil. He thought of his father, who had washed dishes in a diner not unlike this one for 11 years before saving enough to open a single food cart, the food cart that would, one improbable decade later, become Hale and Company. His father used to say that you could learn everything about a man's character by watching how he treated the person with the least power in the room. Richard had spent so many years in boardrooms that he had forgotten to watch. Marin returned with the coffee and a small basket of bread she had not been asked to bring. "It's on me," she said quietly, sliding it across the table before anyone could notice. "Don't worry about it." Richard studied her for a moment, the stranger risking her job for a man the entire room had already dismissed, and asked her, in the rough voice he had adopted for the evening, why she was doing this. She paused, glancing back once toward the kitchen doors as if checking she wouldn't be overheard, and told him that her father had lost his job when she was 12, and there had been a winter where they didn't have much, and a stranger at a gas station had once paid for their tank of gas and a bag of groceries without saying a single word, just squeezed her father's shoulder and walked away. She said she never learned his name, but she never forgot what it felt like to be seen. "Everyone deserves a seat at the table," she said. "That's just what I believe." It was such a plain, unremarkable sentence, and yet it landed in Richard's chest like something enormous shifting into place. He asked her, then, if she liked working there. She hesitated, weighing her words carefully, the way people do when they suspect their honesty might cost them something. She admitted that it had changed in the last 2 years, ever since new management came in. Colder, she said, more focused on the numbers on the receipt than on the people signing them. She said there'd been a directive quietly passed down that certain guests who didn't look like they belonged, should be turned away at the door before they ever reached a table. She said she'd argued about it once, weeks ago, and been written up for it. She told him all of this to a man she believed had absolutely nothing, no power to change a single thing about her circumstances, no reason to care whether she kept her job or lost it. She told him because he was a person sitting in front of her, cold and hungry, and that was reason enough. Richard ate slowly that night, the roasted chicken Marin brought him without him ever ordering, insisting it was a kitchen mistake that would otherwise go to waste, though he suspected she'd paid for it out of her own tips. He watched her work the rest of the floor, refilling glasses, laughing gently with an elderly couple at table 6, crouching down to the child's eye level to ask what her favorite color was. She treated every person in that room, from the men in $1,000 suits to the man in the torn coat by the window, with the exact same unhurried warmth. It was, he realized, the single rarest thing he had encountered in longer than he could remember, and he owned 4 restaurants, 2 hotels, and a seat on the boards of companies whose names appeared daily in the financial papers. Near the end of the night, as the dining room thinned and the string quartet in the corner packed away their instruments, the manager finally emerged from his office. His name was Dale Whitfield, and Richard did not recognize him at all, which told him something on its own about how thoroughly his company had been handed to strangers while he stayed buried in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Dale approached the table with the tight, professional smile of a man about to do something unpleasant and call it policy. He informed Richard, in a voice loud enough for 3 nearby tables to hear, that the restaurant would be closing soon and that perhaps it was time for him to move along, and that he hoped Richard understood this wasn't personal, simply how things were run here. Richard asked, quietly, whether it was restaurant policy to refuse service to paying, well-behaved guests based on their appearance. Dale's smile flickered. He said that some guests made other guests uncomfortable, and that management had a responsibility to the overall experience. It was Marin who spoke next, stepping between them the way she had with Preston hours earlier. She said, evenly but without backing down, that the man had ordered food, paid for nothing yet only because she hadn't brought the check, and had caused no disturbance whatsoever, and that as far as she understood it, the restaurant's own founding values, framed and hung in the staff break room, stated that every guest deserved dignity without exception. Dale's jaw tightened. He told her, in front of Richard and 3 tables of onlookers, that if she cared so much about the man's comfort, she was welcome to comp his meal out of her own paycheck, and that this conversation about her attitude would continue tomorrow in his office. Richard watched her face carefully in that moment, watched her swallow whatever fear she felt and nod once, quietly, refusing to let it show that the threat had landed. She turned back to Richard afterward and told him, gently, that his coffee was still warm if he wanted more, as though nothing at all had just happened. Richard did not reveal himself that night. He left, as planned, through the front door in the cold, but he stood outside on the sidewalk for a long time afterward, watching through the glass as Marin finished wiping down the last table, hung up her apron, and walked out the back employee entrance alone into the snow, her thin jacket clearly no match for the weather. He followed at a distance, not to frighten her, only to understand a little more of the life she went home to, and watched her walk 11 blocks to a modest apartment building with a flickering light in the stairwell, the kind of building Richard had not set foot inside in over 20 years. He returned to his penthouse that night and did not sleep. He sat in his study with the city glittering coldly beyond the window and thought about his father's food cart, about the manual he had written with his own hands, about the framed value statement gathering dust in a break room while men like Dale Whitfield turned it into decoration instead of practice. Somewhere along the way, in the pursuit of growth and profit margins and expansion into new cities, he had stopped walking the floor of his own restaurants. He had stopped knowing the names of the people actually holding the place together. He had let it become exactly the kind of place his father would have been turned away from all those decades ago, before anyone knew the name Hale meant anything at all. The next morning, Richard returned to Hale and Company, but this time in a tailored charcoal suit, his own driver waiting at the curb, his real name once again attached to his face. The staff recognized him instantly, and the dining room fell into the particular silence reserved for the arrival of someone who owns everything in the room. Dale Whitfield nearly tripped over himself coming out of his office, already talking about quarterly numbers and expansion plans, until Richard raised a single hand and asked to see Marin instead. She came out from the kitchen still in her apron, confusion crossing her face when she recognized the coat, now folded over Richard's arm, the same torn coat from the night before. He watched the realization move through her slowly, her hand rising to her mouth, and he told her, in his own voice this time, that he was the man she had seated by the window, the man she had fed on her own dime, the man she had defended in front of her boss even knowing it might cost her the job she needed. He told her that Hale and Company had one rule since the day it opened, a rule about dignity without exception, and that she was the only person in the building who had actually kept it. Dale, standing a few feet away, had gone the color of the tablecloths. Richard did not fire Dale on the spot, though many watching that morning assumed he would. Instead, he asked Marin to walk the floor with him, to tell him honestly everything she had told the homeless man the night before, about the policies quietly passed down, about who had been turned away and why, about what the restaurant had become in the years he'd stopped paying attention. And he listened, really listened, the way his father used to say a man should listen to the people with the least power in the room, because that was where the truth of any business actually lived. In the weeks that followed, the policy vanished. Every guest, regardless of what they wore or what they could afford, was welcomed through the front doors of Hale and Company exactly as the manual had always promised. Richard began spending one evening a week working the floor himself, not as an inspection, but because he had remembered, finally, why he built the place at all. And Marin, who had simply saved a seat for a stranger because she believed everyone deserved one, found herself promoted to floor manager within the month, with the freedom to run the restaurant the way she always believed it should be run. And the story of the night she fed a homeless man who turned out to own the building quietly became a kind of legend among the staff, retold to every new hire on their very first shift, not as gossip, but as a reminder of what the job was actually about. If the story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who could use a reminder that kindness still matters, because stories like this only reach the people who need them when we pass them along. And before you go, we have one small request. Type the word seat in the comments below if you believe everyone deserves one, no matter how they look or where life has left them standing. Costs nothing, but it means everything to this community. Richard Hale never forgot the lesson a 23-year-old waitress taught him on the coldest night of that winter, that the measure of a man or a company or a life well lived was never found in the boardroom. It was found in whether you saved a seat for the person everyone else had already decided to walk past.